The sun was setting behind the hills, casting a golden glow across the Wilson family's backyard. It was a peaceful Sunday afternoon, and the air was filled with familiar sounds of family chatter and laughter. A long table was laid out with food, and everyone gathered around to celebrate a milestone. It wasn't just any regular family reunion. This one was special. Jack, the eldest grandson, had returned home after a long deployment overseas. The family had been waiting for this moment, the moment when their soldier would come back and share stories from the front lines. As Jack made his way into the room, there was an overwhelming sense of pride in his family's eyes. He was a hero, having served his country with distinction. But what Jack didn't expect was what followed. His relatives, whom he had known all his life, had no idea how to truly honor him or his time away. Instead of the welcome home celebration he had hoped for, the conversation quickly turned to something that would make Jack feel more like a fool than a hero. It started with Aunt Karen. She was always a loud one, quick to crack jokes, and often too eager to have a laugh at someone else's expense. As Jack sat down with the others, she immediately grabbed the box that had been handed to him. Well, Jack," she said, teasingly eyeing the contents. "After all these years of serving your country, what does your dear old grandpa leave you?" Everyone gathered around to see what Jack had inherited from his late grandfather, who had also been a veteran. Jack opened the box carefully. Inside, there were old photos, letters, and medals. It was clear that his grandfather had wanted him to have something meaningful, something that could carry the weight of his legacy. But the most curious item inside the box was a small, faded dog toy, a squeaky ball, its fur worn down with age. It had little paw prints all over it. Aunt Karen let out a loud, mocking laugh. "A dog toy? Really, Jack? This is what you get? After serving your country? What is this, a joke?" The room erupted into laughter. Jack smiled awkwardly, his face flushed with embarrassment. His family continued to laugh, not understanding the depth of the gift. "Oh, come on," Aunt Karen continued. "I thought you'd at least get a medal or something of value. This is just a dog toy." Jack's heart sank, but he said nothing. He didn't want to ruin the mood, even though part of him felt deeply hurt. His grandfather had always been a quiet man, not one to express his emotions openly. Jack had cherished the old man's wisdom and stories throughout his childhood. But now, as he held the dog toy, something felt off. Why would Grandpa leave him this? He looked around at his family, their smiles widening as they continued to mock him. Little did they know, that small dog toy was the key to unlocking a secret, one that would change Jack's life forever. The laughter of his family still echoed in Jack's ears as he made his way back to his room. The words of Aunt Karen and the mocking tone of everyone else had stung him more than he was willing to admit. His hands, still holding the small dog toy, felt strangely heavy. It was nothing more than a faded, squeaky ball. There was nothing extraordinary about it. It was old, worn out from years of use, and could easily be mistaken for a cheap piece of children's plaything. But for some reason, it felt like it carried an immense weight, one that Jack couldn't quite understand. He dropped the toy on his bed, sitting down beside it. His mind raced as he reflected on his grandfather, on quiet, stoic man who had raised him after his parents had passed. Jack had always known that his grandfather had lived a full life, filled with rich stories of the past. Stories of service, hardship, and sacrifice. Grandpa had been a hero in his own right. Jack remembered the nights they spent by the fire, listening to his grandfather's stories about the war, about the bonds he formed with the men he served alongside, and the dog he had found in the middle of the battlefield. That dog had been his grandfather's most trusted companion, a creature whose loyalty knew no bounds. Jack had always assumed that the dog was just another war story, one of those tales that grandfathers tell their grandchildren to entertain them. But as he sat there on the edge of the bed, staring at the squeaky ball, he began to wonder, was this toy more than just a relic? Was it tied to something deeper than what his family understood? Jack's thoughts drifted back to the years he had spent serving his country, the long months in foreign lands, the dangerous missions, the constant feeling of uncertainty, the comrades he had lost, the bonds that were formed under fire, and the realization that war changes everything. But even in those darkest moments, there had been a constant, his grandfather's words. You'll always have something to hold on to, Grandpa had said. In the worst of times, when all seems lost, find something that reminds you of home. That's when it hit Jack. Grandpa had always been about finding something to cling to in the face of adversity. Maybe this dog toy wasn't just a random memento. Maybe it was a symbol, a reminder. But a reminder of what? He picked it up again, squeezing the ball gently, almost as if trying to extract some kind of hidden message. There was no hidden inscription, no letters or marks to reveal its purpose. It was just a simple, squeaky dog toy. But Jack knew better. Nothing his grandfather did was ever random. His life had been filled with purpose, and Jack knew that whatever he had left behind, it was meant to be something more than just an object. It had meaning. Jack spent hours sitting on his bed, thinking. The squeak of the toy echoed in his mind, and it filled him with a strange sense of calm. There was something reassuring about it, like it had the power to bring him peace, no matter how small the gesture seemed. Jack closed his eyes, trying to piece together the past. What had his grandfather meant by leaving him this toy? Was there something he wasn't seeing? He could almost picture his grandfather now, sitting in his old rocking chair, his dog by his side, the two of them sharing a quiet moment together. Grandpa never spoke much about the dog, but Jack had always known that it was special to him, a constant companion, a loyal friend, the kind of friend that a soldier, someone who had seen the horrors of war, would need more than anything else. Jack placed the toy back down on the bed and decided to sleep on it. The night was quiet, and the house seemed still as he lay there, staring at the ceiling. He knew he couldn't let it go. There was something more to the toy, something that his family had failed to see, and he was determined to find out what it was. The next morning, Jack woke up early, feeling restless. He could still hear the laughter from the night before, still feel the sting of his family's mocking. But now, it didn't bother him as much. He was no longer concerned with their opinions. He had something bigger to focus on. The mystery behind the dog toy and what it might reveal about his grandfather's past. Jack decided to take the toy with him as he left for a walk. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft, golden light over the countryside. Jack walked for miles, thinking about his grandfather's life, about the lessons he had taught him, and about the dog who had been so important to him. The dog. It was the key to everything. Jack could feel it in his bones. As he walked, Jack made a decision. He would go through his grandfather's old belongings, every letter, every photograph, every piece of memorabilia, until he found the answer. He had to know why Grandpa had left him the dog toy. There had to be more to it. Jack's first stop was the attic. He had spent many hours up there as a child, rummaging through boxes and old trunks, imagining the adventures they held. The attic was a place of nostalgia, but it was also a place of mystery. Jack knew that his grandfather had kept many things hidden in the attic, things he never spoke of. It was time to uncover them. The attic was exactly how Jack remembered it, dimly lit, with dusty beams of sunlight filtering through the cracked windows. It smelled of old books and time-worn leather, the scent of memories that had been locked away for far too long. He pulled the cord to the single hanging light bulb, and it flickered to life, casting long shadows across the stacks of forgotten boxes and old furniture. Jack hesitated for a moment, his eyes scanning the room as if waiting for something to leap out at him. He had spent so many afternoons up here as a child, exploring the nooks and crannies of his grandfather's past. But today felt different. Today, the search wasn't about nostalgia. It was about uncovering a hidden legacy. He approached a large wooden chest in the corner of the room. It was covered in dust. The once polished would now weather with age. Jack remembered that his grandfather had always kept the chest locked, telling him stories about how it contained precious memories, things too important to be shared with just anyone. But now, with the toy in his hand and the key in his pocket, it felt like he was the one meant to unlock its contents. The small metal key from the dog toy slid into the lock with surprising ease. Jack turned it slowly, the creak of the lock breaking the silence of the attic. With a soft click, the chest was open. Inside, the chest was filled with neatly stacked papers, journals, and a few dusty old books. There was a faint smell of leather and parchment, the kind of scent that only old, well-kept items seemed to possess. Jack sifted through the papers, But nothing seemed out of ordinary at first glance. There were letters, bills, and old receipts, things that didn't seem to hold much meaning. Then, at the very bottom of the chest, something caught his eye. It was a small, leather-bound journal, its cover worn and faded from years of use. The gold lettering on the front had long since faded, but Jack could still make out the faint imprint of his grandfather's initials, J.W. Jack's heart skipped a beat as he gently pulled the journal from the chest. The leather was soft, almost fragile, and the pages inside looked like they had been handled countless times. It wasn't just a journal. It was a chronicle of his grandfather's life, a life filled with secrets and stories that had never been shared. He sat down on the dusty floor, opening the journal to the first page. The handwriting was small and precise, every word carefully formed as though his grandfather had taken his time to write down the important moments of his life. Jack read the first few lines. July 14th, 1942. It was the hottest summer on record. The men are tired and morale is low. But there's something here, something worth fighting for. We've been assigned a new mission. I don't know what it is yet, but I've learned to trust the orders no matter how strange they seem. Jack's fingers trembled slightly as he turned the page, the anticipation building with each word. His grandfather had never spoken much about the war, only snippets here and there, vague references to things that had happened. But now, reading his words, Jack felt like he was getting a glimpse into a part of his grandfather's life that had been carefully hidden. The next few entries were much the same, short, cryptic notes about the hardships his grandfather had faced during his time in the service. But then, a few pages later, Jack came across something that made him stop. August 2nd, 1942. We found him today. A dog. He was left behind by the enemy, wounded and starving. I didn't know what to think at first, but when I looked into his eyes, I saw something familiar. He wasn't just any dog. He was a survivor, like us. He had been through hell, just like we had. I've decided to take him in. His name is Scout. Jack felt a lump form in his throat as he read the entry. He had always heard stories about Scout, the dog that had been with his grandfather during the war. But reading about him now, in his grandfather's own words, made the story feel so much more real. Jack could almost see the scene playing out in his mind. His grandfather, in the midst of battle, coming across a wounded dog that had been abandoned. He could almost hear his grandfather's voice, soft and filled with emotion, as he spoke about the bond they had formed. The journal entries continued, chronicling Scout's time with Jack's grandfather. The dog had become his constant companion, a source of comfort and loyalty during the darkest times of the war. Jack's grandfather spoke about how Scout had saved his life on multiple occasions, how the dog had heard enemy soldiers approaching and alerted him just in time. There were even notes about how Scout had helped lift the spirits of the men in the camp, providing them with a small sense of hope amidst the chaos. As Jack read through the journal, he began to realize just how important Scout had been to his grandfather. The dog wasn't just a pet. He was a symbol of survival, of loyalty, and of the unbreakable bond that had formed between man and animal during the horrors of war. It made sense now why Grandpa had kept the dog toy. It was a reminder of that bond, of a friendship that had transcended everything. At the very back of the journal, Jack found the final entry. November 12th, 1945. Scout is gone. I had to leave him behind in the chaos of the final days of the war. I couldn't bring him home with me, but I promised I would never forget him. He was more than just a dog. He was a brother. I hope wherever he is, he knows that I love him like family. And that's why I'm leaving this toy behind. It's for you, Jack. You're the only one who will understand. Jack sat there in stunned silence, the weight of his grandfather's words sinking in. He had always thought of Scout as just a part of his grandfather's past, a part of his war stories. But now, he understood that the dog had been so much more than that. Scout had been a life-changing presence, a constant source of companionship and survival, and his grandfather had cherished him more than anything. The dog toy, the one that had been mocked so easily by his family, was not just an object. It was a symbol of everything that had been important to his grandfather, a symbol of survival, loyalty, and the bond between man and dog. And now, Jack understood why his grandfather had left it to him. Jack closed the journal, the silence of the attic settling around him like a heavy cloak. His mind was racing, trying to absorb everything he had just learned. The dog toy wasn't just a piece of his grandfather's past. It was a message, a reminder of the things that truly mattered in life, the things that couldn't be measured by medals or material wealth. He stood up, looking down at the toy once again. This time, it didn't seem so insignificant. This time, it felt like a treasure, a piece of history that Jack would carry with him for the rest of his life. The discovery in the attic had shaken Jack to his core. The journal, with its worn leather cover and fragile pages, had uncovered a secret his grandfather had kept hidden for decades. But there was more to the story. Jack could feel it. The journal had only hinted at the depth of his grandfather's bond with Scout. There were still questions left unanswered. Questions about the dog, about his grandfather's life after the war, and, most importantly, about why the dog toy had been left for Jack. His mind raced as he walked down from the attic, carrying the journal in his hands. His family's mocking laughter from the night before felt like a distant memory. It no longer mattered. They couldn't see what Jack saw, the profound connection between his grandfather and Scout. He had to find out more. He couldn't let his grandfather's legacy remain a secret any longer. The first step was clear. He needed to learn more about Scout. The journal had given him a glimpse of their relationship during the war, but it was obvious there was so much more to the story. He needed to find out where Scout had come from and what had happened to him after the war. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the dog was not just a symbol of survival for his grandfather, but a living reminder of something bigger, something that connected the past to the present. Jack knew there were still people alive who might remember Scout. He had heard bits and pieces of stories over the years, from old war buddies of his grandfather who had visited their house. But Jack had never paid much attention before. Now, it was all he could think about. The next morning, he decided to track down some of his grandfather's old friends. He started with Mr. Turner, an elderly man who had served with his grandfather during the war. Mr. Turner had often been a guest at the family's gatherings, always quick to tell tall tales about his adventures with Grandpa. Jack remembered the twinkle in Mr. Turner's eye whenever he spoke about the war, but he had never shared much about the personal side of things. Jack found Mr. Turner at a small, run-down diner on the edge of town. The man sat at a corner booth, nursing a cup of coffee. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted the cup to his lips, but his eyes were sharp, alert despite his age. "Jack, my boy," Mr. Turner said, offering a warm smile. "It's good to see you. What brings you here?" Jack sat down across from him, the journal and the dog toy now tucked securely in his bag. "I've been going through some of Grandpa's things," he began, trying to keep his voice steady, "and I came across a journal. It talks about a dog, Scout. I'm trying to learn more about him." Mr. Turner's expression changed immediately. His eyes darkened, and for a moment, Jack thought he might refuse to speak. But then, after a long pause, he leaned in closer, his voice lowering to a whisper. "Scout," Mr. Turner murmured. "He was more than just a dog, Jack. Your grandfather didn't just save that dog. He saved himself. And in return, Scout saved him too." Jack felt a chill run down his spine as Mr. Turner spoke. He had heard hints of these things before, but never this directly. "What do you mean? What happened to him after the war?" Mr. Turner hesitated, clearly reluctant to relive those days. But Jack wasn't going to let it go. "Please, Mr. Turner, I need to know." The old man sighed deeply, his fingers gripping the edge of his cup. "Your grandfather and Scout were inseparable. It wasn't just a wartime bond. It was a life bond. But when the war ended, things changed. They were sent back home, but not together. Scout wasn't allowed to come with your grandfather. The military didn't want to deal with civilianizing a war dog. It was heartbreaking for your granddad, more than you could imagine." Jack listened intently, unable to tear his eyes away from Mr. Turner. His mind raced with the weight of what he was hearing. "So what happened to Scout? Did he ever find him again?" Mr. Turner's face grew solemn. "Your grandfather tried. He tried for years. But Scout was never found. It was as if the dog had vanished. Your granddad never gave up searching for him. He would write letters, visit dog shelters, asking if anyone had seen him, but there was no trace." Jack's heart ached. It was hard to imagine his grandfather, the stoic, strong man, holding on to the memory of a dog for so many years, searching tirelessly for him. Why didn't he ever talk about it? Jack asked. Because it was too painful, Mr. Turner replied, his voice tinged with regret. Your grandfather never really healed from the loss of Scout. He buried the pain deep inside, carrying it with him all those years. The toy, Jack, it wasn't just a memory. It was a piece of hope. He kept it because in his heart, he believed that one day, Scout would find his way home. And when your grandfather passed, he knew you were the only one who would understand. Jack felt a lump form in his throat. His grandfather had lived with the secret, this pain, for all those years. The dog toy wasn't just a memento. It was a symbol of everything his grandfather had lost and everything he still held on to. Mr. Turner, Jack began, his voice thick with emotion. What do you think Grandpa wanted me to do with this? Why give me the toy now, after all this time? The old man looked at Jack with understanding in his eyes. He knew you needed to carry the weight of the past, Jack. Not as a burden, but as a legacy. You're the only one who can carry that hope now. And maybe, just maybe, this is your chance to finish what he started. If Scout is out there, it's up to you to find him. Jack sat back, overwhelmed by the enormity of what Mr. Turner had just said. His grandfather's hope, his quest to find Scout, had been passed on to him. It was no longer just a story or a memory. It was now his responsibility. Jack had a mission, one that had been waiting for him all along. The weight of Mr. Turner's words hung heavy on Jack's shoulders as he left the diner. His heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing with everything he had learned in the past few hours. His grandfather's search for Scout had been a lifelong quest, a silent battle fought in the shadows of everyday life. Jack's mission was now clear. Find Scout, not just for the dog, but for the legacy of the man who had passed on that hope. As Jack sat in his car, staring at the road ahead, he felt a deep sense of responsibility settle within him. His grandfather had entrusted him with this quest, and he wasn't about to back down now. He had to find Scout, not just to honor his grandfather, but because the dog represented something far greater, survival, loyalty, and an unbreakable bond. The first thing Jack did was revisit the letters his grandfather had written over the years. He spent hours poring over them, each one filled with frustration and hope. There were details about Scout, where his grandfather had last seen him, the shelters he had visited, and the people he had spoken to. It was clear that his grandfather had searched high and low, never giving up on hope that Scout might still be out there. But the clues were old and time had taken its toll. The addresses were outdated, the people long gone. Jack had no choice but to start over. He began calling every animal shelter, every rescue organization, and every dog registry he could find. At first, the responses were what he had expected, polite but dismissive. Most of them didn't even know who his grandfather was. But Jack persisted. He wasn't ready to give up yet. One afternoon, as he was about to make another round of calls, he received a message from a small shelter in a neighboring town. The woman on the other end of the phone was different from the others. She sounded intrigued, even a little excited. "Mr. Wilson," she said, her voice eager. "I think we may have found something. There's a dog here that fits your description. He's old now, but he might just be the one you're looking for." Jack's heart skipped a beat. Could it be? Could this be the dog his grandfather had been searching for all these years? Without wasting another moment, Jack jumped into his car and headed for the shelter. The drive felt endless, the anticipation gnawing at him. Every mile that passed seemed like an eternity. But he couldn't turn back now. This was it. When Jack arrived at the shelter, he was greeted by a kind woman who led him to a small pen at the back of the facility. Inside was an older dog, lying on a bed of straw. His fur was graying and his movements were slow, but his eyes were sharp, filled with a quiet intelligence. Jack felt his breath catch his throat as he stepped closer. "His name is Scout," the woman said softly. "We got him a few years ago, but he's been with us for a while now. He came to us as a stray, and when we checked his microchip, we found out he'd been with a soldier. The name on the chip, it was your grandfather's." Jack's eyes welled up with tears as he knelt down beside the dog. He wasn't sure what to expect, but as Scout lifted his head and looked up at him, Jack knew this was him, the dog who had been there for Grandpa, the dog who had shared the same battles, the same struggles, the dog who had been a part of his grandfather's life, and now a part of his own. "Grandpa," Jack whispered, his voice breaking as he reached out a hand to gently pet the dog. Scout responded with a soft whimper, licking Jack's hand as if recognizing him. The woman watched quietly, sensing the profound connection between the two. "He's been waiting a long time for this moment," she said. "You must be the grandson your grandfather spoke so highly of." Jack nodded, unable to speak. The weight of the moment was overwhelming. After all these years, decades even, he had found Scout. The dog was here, and Jack could finally bring him home. With the help of the shelter, Jack arranged for Scout to be brought to his home. It was clear that the dog was old, but the spark in his eyes was undeniable. He had lived a long, difficult life, but the bond between him and Jack's grandfather had never truly faded. And now, it was Jack's turn to honor that bond. When Jack returned home, he placed the dog toy on the mantel. It had been passed down to him, and now it would remain in a place of honor. It wasn't just a toy. It was a symbol of loyalty, of survival, and of a legacy that had been carried from one generation to the next. As the years passed, Jack took care of Scout, giving him the love and attention his grandfather had always wanted to. The dog grew older, his fur graying further, but the bond between them only deepened. Jack would often sit with Scout, telling him stories about his grandfather, the man who had saved him, the man who had never given up. One evening, as Jack sat on the porch, Scout lying at his feet, Jack thought about everything that had led him to this moment. He had uncovered a hidden legacy, one that had been passed down to him in the form of a dog toy. But it wasn't just about finding Scout. It was about understanding the power of hope, of memories, and of the ties that bind us to the past. Jack knew that his grandfather's mission had been fulfilled. He had carried the legacy forward, and in doing so had forged his own connection to the past, one that would live on for generations to come.